God, on this day in the midst of summer when we have the leisure, some of us, to think about more than what's coming next on our list of things to do. Help us take a breath and find traction again to live real lives. Amen. Well, let me just say also, women in this church have had women's retreat and do a bang-up job with it. Men's retreats kind of come and go, and I'm trying to bring one back. So we're scheduled one for September 20th, 23rd through 25th. That's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday at Manuka. Manuka is Julius Meyer's old estate on the gorge. It's just gorgeous. It's terrific. Sorry. And I'm leading the retreat, and a lot of folks from Rose City Presbyterian Church in Hollywood are coming too, so be a chance for us to get together. We need to sign up before the 15th of August if you want to go see me. Okay. Twice in my life, I've had the pleasure of visiting the Museum of Welsh Life in a little village called St. Fagans, just outside Cardiff in Wales. Anybody been there? Not one. Okay. Yeah, it's a little, maybe one. It's a wonderful little place located on a large acreage where they have literally gathered cottages, a medieval church, a school, some business buildings, and other things from all over Wales, so that you can, get a sense of Welsh life going way back. And they also have a series of early 19th century row houses. They're what we today would call, tiny condos. And they offer as small a space as a human family can inhabit, I think. I know that many families make do with, 1 or 2 rooms and do just fine, but I sense that these were the smallest places you could live with any hope of at least having a tiny amount of privacy and dignity too. And one of these little cells captured my heart. It's accommodations dated to 1855. The plan was the same as all the rest. An open room with a fire in the front of the place, a room in back which served as both kitchen and bedroom for the master and spouse. And then up a stair that was actually more a ladder than a stair that was right by the fireplace was a room the size of the downstairs maybe, but only about 3.5, 4 feet high. So adults could crawl in, but that was about all. It was a really good place, though, for little children. And what captured my heart was what was placed lovingly over the fireplace. It was one of the very few decorations in the house. And on one little white dish with a pink border and black writing, it simply said, "Thou, God, seest me. Thou, God, seest me." You want to know how small a person can feel in this world and still have a sense that he or she is a person? Someone who puts those 4 words over his or her small hearth. It was a life that was clearly poor in every respect, not destitute, just poor in the plainest, simplest way, and just maybe rich in one way too, rich toward God. Which is where I want to go with the sermon, because at least that's where I want to end up, because that's where Jesus ends up in telling the parable that we've come to know as the parable of the rich fool. And here are his words in ending it. "So it is with those who store up riches for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The trouble is many discussions of this parable end up just short of those last words, and they're left out. And so many merely end up using the parable as a club to beat up the rich. And that's so easy to do. I mean, Jesus said more about wealth than he said about any other moral issue of his day. I mean, way more. Barbara Brown Taylor has said if we could buy a green letter edition of the Bible, not a red letter, but a green letter edition of the Bible, with all those passages highlighted in U.S. Department of Treasury green ink, it would be hard for any of us to deny that the gap between the rich and the poor concerned Jesus more than lying, more than stealing, way more than sex, especially in Luke's gospel, where he confronts the rich 4 times as often as he does in the other gospels. Biblical scholars call this evidence of God's preferential option for the poor, which means roughly that given a choice between siding with the rich person and siding with the poor person, God is going to choose the poor person every single time. Not because they're more virtuous necessarily, but because if God weren't on their side, no one would be. Goliath would win out over little David every time. So God stands with the little people, and when the big people come at them, God lets them know that sooner or later, in this world or the next, the rich and poor, the happy and sad are going to change places. So the parable set for today is so contemporary, telling us about a rich man who has his eye on a piece of valuable real estate near the center of town and right on a street with plans for a new trolley line. It was a puny little 3-bedroom, but it had some charm, and it definitely had some historical value. It was old, and the Schnitzers or the Corbetts lived there once when they were young, and maybe a family whose name was Meyer. And the man of means with big barns full of stuff hoped the city was going to let him pull that rickety old thing down and build something there with at least 7 bedrooms and an underground garage. I mean, who wouldn't want that, given an ample enough bank account? Besides, in the first century, it was commonly believed that if you were rich, it was only because you were righteous and God-fearing. You deserve what you had. And if you were poor or sick, it was because you must have been very wicked and God had judged you for it. Those who obeyed God were blessed with material rewards, and those who did not were condemned with poverty, which worked out real nicely on 2 accounts. It not only allowed the rich to enjoy their riches, it also allowed them to walk past the beggars who slept by their garbage cans without even looking down at them. Who were they, after all, to interfere with the judgment that God had arranged for those poor souls? The best thing was to leave well enough alone, let the poor pick themselves up, dust themselves off, buy their own air conditioner, let them try hard to do what was right, and God might smile on them too. That was the message of the rich to the poor in Jesus' day, and the temple authorities backed that up. And it's still pretty much the message of churches today, at least the ones that the rich feel comfortable attending. It's called health and wealth theology, and it's been around, in fact, since the Bible. Jesus couldn't stand it, and what he really hated was the way of interpreting scriptures to justify the self-obsessions of the rich. Now, there was plenty in the writings called Moses and the prophets that went the other way. But those were not the passages that the rich people read out loud. So near the end of the Beatitudes, his one sermon, Jesus says, "Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation." He said that just to make sure they got the idea. See how easy it is then to beat up on the rich. Now get a load of this. In the early 1830s, the French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville, visiting our young nation, was struck by what he called the, quote, general equality of condition among American people. Few were very rich and few were terribly poor. And de Tocqueville felt that this was fertile soil for the development of true democracy. Interesting there. And it was. And it remained this way for a good long time. Due to economic development and expanded educational opportunity and government programs, by the 1970s, America had become about as economically egalitarian as it ever was. Social Security and veterans housing programs, the GI Bill, the civil rights movement, they all contributed to enhanced economic equality. And then everything changed. Beginning in the 70s, continuing through the 80s and the 90s, and into the 2000s, most of the economic growth benefited the wealthiest among us. So today, the gap's a nice word, maybe chasm is better, between the poor and the wealthy is larger than at any point before. The CEO worker pay gap at low-wage corporations in the United States is widening, according to a new report by the Institute for Policy Studies, so that the average CEO is making $670 to every dollar of the median U.S. worker. $670 to one. I remember it being 300 to one, and I thought, oh God, how appalling. That wasn't long ago, people. But you know, the numbers don't matter as much as the trend. It cannot predict good for America if it goes on and on forever, and it can't predict good for the poor, and I hasten to add, it can't predict good for the super rich either. So maybe the new Build Back Better bill with tax restructuring for the top 1% might help if Kirsten Sinema doesn't scotch it. You know, way back in 1999, Pope John Paul II met with Catholic bishops of North and South America in Mexico City, where he surprised no one by urging them to care for the poor. But he surprised quite a few of them by also calling them to minister to the rich. He said, love for the poor must be preferential but not exclusive. While he didn't put it this bluntly, he was warning church leaders that if they continued to villainize the rich in their teaching and preaching, they're going to drive those people out of the Church of Christ and into the church of unbridled capitalism, where their wealth and success will receive a much warmer welcome. Because, as I said, in the churches that preach a wealth ethic, to be rich means you've done something right, not something wrong. So Pope John Paul's words were timely in the midst of the boom years and offered some balance to an issue that goes easily out of kilter. Referring to the truths in Jesus' teaching about money, Reverend James Forbes once said, "Nobody gets into heaven without a letter of reference from the poor." Nobody gets into heaven without a letter of reference from the poor. Well, looking closely at the parable, I'd be remiss to ignore the potent lever that Jesus uses to drive home his point. This is the most important part of this. It's not guilt about money, but something much more universal. Jesus talks about mortality. This is the fool part of the parable of the rich fool. This very night your life is being demanded of you, the narrator in the parable says. And the things you've prepared, whose will they be? Kind of pointed. The fellow with the barns had not thought about that. Perhaps he thought of his riches as a hedge against death. I mean, that's what we sometimes think. I can't die. I've got too much in the bank. I suppose that's a danger when it comes to the accumulation, of anything. Do we still think that way? I ask this because the topic of mortality has become, an accepted part of everyday discussion. It didn't used to be, but it is now. And we know this because the term bucket list is now in the dictionary. People talk about it all the time. Here's a top 10 list of the things in the bucket lists of a lot of Americans today. See if this matches yours. swim with the dolphins, live abroad half the year, hang out in a vineyard under the Tuscan sun, see the northern lights, take a road trip through every state, ride in a hot air balloon over Turkey, not just over Phoenix, right? Oh no, it's Albuquerque, isn't it? Yeah. Swim in every ocean, see the pyramids, go on an African safari, and for the super rich, ride a rocket. Jesus says, be careful how you plan out your life. You have no idea when it will end. And you know, there's similar wisdom in the following verses from the New Testament letter of James, which few people have ever read. Here's how it goes. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there doing business and making money. Yet you do not even know what tomorrow will bring. For what is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that. Still, I think our bucket lists can be important for what they communicate to us about life itself. Why? Because they stretch us. Things like skydiving can, put us in vulnerable places out of our comfort zone where, by facing down our fears, we have the greatest opportunity to grow and change. A woman named Robin Ringer had something pretty simple on her bucket list. I want to close with this piece. She wanted to spend a weekend in Manhattan, something Don and Kathy just did. It's a place that she had never been but always wanted to go. Well, she did it with a friend a few years ago. And while she was there, she met by chance the actor Al Pacino. And here's the text of a letter she wrote to Al Pacino about her visit to New York City. Dear Mr. Pacino, you walked into Joe Allen's cafe, moving faster through a restaurant than anyone I had ever seen. Your fast stride made me notice you. Your oversized black coat also made me look. I knew right away that you were wearing the same coat that enveloped you on the beach in the movie The Insider. Your eyes stared intensively, yet appeared not to see anything. Was it really you? I asked the waitress. Isn't that Al Pacino? I'm not supposed to say, but it is. Sue, I said to my sister-in-law, get up, leave your stuff here. Come on, let's go. I don't know why I felt the urge to hurry. It was instinctual, kind of like an adrenaline reaction. As we approached your table, Mr. Pacino, I became painfully aware that you were not only a celebrity, but a man like any other man, and that I had made a terrible mistake. When you saw us striding toward you, your head jerked to the side and your face grimaced as if you were in pain. Despite what I interpreted as your anguish, it was too late to turn back. We were already standing at your table, and I had already thrust a used cocktail napkin and pen at you, which you seemed to accept automatically. Mr. Pacino, I said, we just wanted to tell you how much we have enjoyed your movies. We don't get out much, Sue, my sister-in-law said, trying to explain our behavior. When the corners of your mouth turned up in a perfunctory half smile and you look like you might vomit, I tried to take the napkin back. Oh, please, Mr. Pacino, I begged. You don't have to sign that, really, please don't sign it. We just wanted to tell you that we're great fans. For the first time, our eyes made contact. You began to laugh, and your whole body seemed to relax. Mine did too. You signed my battered napkin, then reached out to shake our hands, a firm, friendly handshake offered with a wide grin. Even though I cannot read what you wrote on the cocktail napkin, hopefully it is not an obscenity. I will cherish it always because it reminds me that celebrities are human beings and that fame is only a perception. At first, we thought that nothing could be more memorable than seeing you, Mr. Pacino, but we were wrong. There were many memorable moments during this rare visit to New York City. A man died on the sidewalk in front of our eyes. Minutes earlier, he'd been laughing at a table next to ours at Charlie O's restaurant. But on the way to the theater, we passed his body on the sidewalk. People just walked by as two men pumped on his chest. His blonde companion stamped her spiky black heels on the sidewalk, repeating, "Come on, come on!" But he continued to lie there unresponsive. We went on to Edward Albee's play, The Goat, about a man who was having an affair with a goat named Sylvia. The wife, played brilliantly by Sally Field, spent much of the play enraged, breaking dishes and vases and talking and yelling about love and hurt and pain and how could he be having an affair with a goat. The story stunned us with grief and hysterical laughter, and we craved a chance to read or hear the lines again. Okay, I'll admit it, I spent $195 on a black velvet scarf with red, green, and gold flowers that change colors with the light. I've never bought anything so extravagant before, but hey, it was New York City, and it was from Saks. I saw my best friend from law school, too, who had breast cancer and no hair, and I got to wrap my arms around her and hug her like I wanted to every day since she started chemo. I returned home to my husband and daughter, who I'm rarely away from. Getting home was the best part of the trip. So, Mr. Pacino, I just wanted to tell you that I understand now what Anna Scott was trying to tell Will in the movie Notting Hill when she said the fame thing isn't real, you know. Life and death are real. Love is real. New York City is real, and you are real. It was nice meeting you. Sincerely, Robin Ringer. Amen.